Hello everyone, welcome back to Simply Static. In today's video, I want to explore the horrors that Mother Nature has in store for each of us, if we're not careful, or if we're just unlucky. Today, I want to explore the horror of disease. And be sure to listen all the way to the end. The final story was inspired by one of my favorite YouTubers, Lazy Masquerade. He covered the same story several months back, and when I heard it, it chilled me to the bone, and I knew it was a story I wanted to cover as well. So be sure to check out his channel as well. The link will be in the description. But without further ado, let's dive in to the horrors of disease. Kuru disease is a dangerous and transmissible spongiform encephalopathy. This disease is caused by something every horror fan knows well: cannibalism. It's caused by ingesting a specific protein found in the human brain, and commonly been referred to as laughing sickness. And even though one of the first symptoms is uncontrollable pathological bursts of laughter, this condition is far from a laughing matter. The condition primarily affects the central nervous system in the brain, leading to a whole host of psychological and neurological symptoms, including a lack of emotional and physical control, combined with violent shaking. But ultimately, it always leads to death. Fortunately, this disease is incredibly rare, the last sufferer of which died in 2009. To date, this affliction has only ever been found in one place on Earth. Transmissions of Kuru have only ever been reported among members of the Foray tribe in Papua New Guinea. Members of this tribe would ceremoniously consume their loved ones at funerals. The word Kuru comes from the Foray tribe and is translated as trembling. Fortunately, researchers at Curtin University in Australia declared this epidemic over as of 2012, after observing this disease for decades. And though it obviously goes without saying, Kuru disease is definitely just another reason not to engage in cannibalism. Naegleria fowleri. Naegleria fowleri is also known as the brain-eating amoeba. It's a microbe that typically lives in warm lakes, springs, and pools. It enters into the victim's body through the nose and attacks the brain, where it feeds until eventually the sufferer dies. Once the microbe enters its victim, the infection is called primary amoebic meningoencephalitis, or PAM. And it's a virulent infection that leads to brain swelling and the complete destruction of brain tissue, with the early symptoms beginning anywhere from 2 to 15 days after exposure, beginning with things like fever, sudden or severe headaches, nausea and vomiting, nasal congestion or discharge, even changes in smell and taste. But as the microbe feeds, the damage gets worse, and so do the symptoms. The infected will experience stiff neck and joints, sensitivity to light, confusion, loss of balance and sleepiness, along with terrifying seizures and hallucinations. But the most terrifying aspect of this little microbe is how quickly it kills. According to reports, most victims have died within 5 days of infection. So the next time you find yourself at a summer barbecue, you might just want to think twice before you jump in the lake. Anyone who's gone camping, or anyone who's a fan of deep woods horror stories, will tell you not to drink any stagnant water, but not everyone can tell you why. But that reason is the fear of getting something called Guinea worm disease. And like Negliria, it's another parasitic infection that can be found in water, infested with the larva of a particular type of roundworm. But unlike Negliria, this particular bug takes a little longer to make its presence known. It could take up to 1 year after infection to develop painful blisters on your arms and legs. Blisters that will ultimately explode, exposing tons of tiny worms. And these blisters aren't just unsightly. They often severely and negatively impact the sufferer's quality of life due to severe pain and irritation. And according to the World Health Organization, this infection isn't typically fatal. But there's a small consolation considering the fact that this affliction can last for years, and oftentimes leaves its victims bedridden. And another horrifying fact about these parasites is that they can survive for years in subcutaneous tissue, with the only method of removal being to coax one of these little monsters out of the skin at the opening of a blister by coaxing it to wrap itself around a stick and laboriously twirling it around until it reluctantly and painfully emerges. Fortunately, this parasite can only be found throughout central parts of Africa, with cases being reported in Ghana, Nigeria, Togo, and the Ivory Coast, which is certainly good news for campers in other parts of the world. But we all know there are similarly terrifying bugs scattered in every corner of the globe. So if you find yourself out camping in the woods, do yourself a favor. Boil the water you collect from a running stream, or better yet, remember to pack clean water with you before you set out. You could save yourself years of agony. African Tryptonosomiasis, also known as the sleeping sickness. This is another disease caused by a parasite, typically transmitted after being bit by a particularly loathsome pest known as the tsetse fly. There are 2 types of this disease, both of which present slightly differently, but both of which ultimately lead to death if treatment isn't sought immediately. This microbial horror can be contracted in 24 countries in Central and West Africa, with 2% of cases coming from parasites found in 13 Eastern and Southern African countries. But now that we know where this horror can be found, what happens when you become its victim? Well, shortly after infection, the victim becomes confused as they struggle to walk and stumble about. They try to stay awake, but can't, and they keep falling asleep, even while standing. As the disease progresses, the sleep becomes longer and deeper, eventually causing the victim to slip into a coma, and then, inevitably, death. But fortunately, if you find yourself in part of the world that this parasite calls home, this disease can be treated if detected early enough. So beware. Speaking of waterborne infections, have you ever heard of river blindness? River blindness is transmitted by the bites of an infected black fly. A parasitic worm infects the body and causes severe rashes, intense itching, and even eye lesions, which can lead to blindness. Hence the name. River blindness is most common in remote African villages, near fast-moving streams or rivers. But there have been a few cases in Yemen, on the Arabian Peninsula, and in 6 Latin American countries. Fortunately, this is not an easy infection to contract, and requires being bitten multiple times by an infected fly, and effective treatments do exist for those suffering from this affliction. The recommended treatment is the antiparasitic drug known as ivermectin. It will need to be given every 6 months for the lifespan of the adult worms, roughly 10 to 15 years, or for as long as there is evidence of skin or eye infection in the infected person. The ivermectin does not kill the adults. It only kills the larvae and prevents them from causing damage. Hopefully, the people that are affected by this in the areas mentioned can get the medicine and treatment they need. Because nature really doesn't seem to care. So it's really up to us to start caring about each other. Buruli ulcers. Buruli ulcers seemingly start as harmless swelling on an arm or a leg that ultimately turns out to be anything but, and is caused by an organism called Mycobacterium ulcerans. The disease it causes is chronic and debilitating, mainly affecting the skin and sometimes even bone. The organism belongs to the family of bacteria that causes tuberculosis and leprosy, and produces a unique toxin that causes the breakdown of healthy tissue, leading to debilitating ulcers that will often need surgery to remove. Fortunately, in 2005, antibiotic treatments were introduced. But the most horrifying part about this disease is that doctors still don't know how this bacteria is transferred to humans. 85% of Buruli ulcer cases can be found in Benin, Ghana, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, Cameroon, and Cote d'Ivoire. That said, they aren't the only places. The disease has been found in 33 other countries, and as of 2017, across Africa, Asia, Central and South America, and the Western Pacific. So if you find yourself in the hot zone, and you see a little swelling or a rash, don't let your imagination run wild. But maybe you want to see a doctor anyway. Better safe than sorry. And now, the following is the story I told you at the beginning was inspired by lazy Masquerade. Rabies. Rabies. It's exceptionally common, but people just don't run into the animals that carry it often. Skunks especially, and bats. Let me paint you a picture. You go camping, and at midday you decide to take a nap in a nice little hammock. While sleeping, a tiny brown bat, in the, quote, rage stage of the infection, is fidgeting in broad daylight, uncomfortable and thirsty, and you snort, startling him. He goes into attack mode, except you're sleeping, and he's a little brown bat, so he weighs around 6 grams. You don't even feel him land on your bare knee. As he starts to bite, his teeth are tiny, hardly enough to even break the skin. But he does manage to give you the equivalent of a tiny scrape that goes completely unnoticed. Rabies does not travel in your blood. In fact, a blood test won't even tell you if you've got it. Antibody tests may be done, but are useless if you've ever been vaccinated. You wake up none the wiser. If you notice anything at the bite site at all, you assume you just lightly scraped it on something. But the bomb has been lit, and your nervous system is the wick. The rabies will multiply along your nervous system, doing virtually no damage and completely undetectable. You literally have no symptoms. It may be 4 days, it may be a year, but the camping trip is most likely long forgotten. Then one day your back starts to ache, or maybe you get a slight headache. And at this point, you're already dead. There is no cure. There is no treatment. It has a 100% kill rate. Absorb that for a moment. Not a single other virus on the planet has a 100% kill rate. Only rabies. And once you're symptomatic, it's over. You're dead. So, what does it look like? Your headache turns into a fever and a general feeling of being unwell. You're fidgety, uncomfortable, and scared. As the virus that has taken its time getting into your brain finds a vast network of nerve endings, it begins to rapidly reproduce, starting at the base of your brain, where your pons is located. This is the part of the brain that controls communication between the rest of your brain and body, as well as sleep cycles. Next, you become anxious. You still think you only had a mild fever, but suddenly you find yourself scared, even horrified, and it doesn't occur to you that you don't even know why. This is because the rabies is chewing up your amygdala. As your cerebellum becomes hot with the virus, you begin to lose muscle coordination and balance. You think maybe it's a good idea to go to the doctor now, but assuming a doctor is smart enough to even run the tests necessary in the few days you have left on the planet, odds are they'll only be able to tell your loved ones what you died of later. You're twitchy, shaking and scared. You have the normal fear of not knowing what's going on, but the virus is really fucking the amygdala. And this is amplified 100-fold. It's around this time that hydrophobia starts. You're horribly thirsty, and you just want water, but you can't drink. Every time you do, your throat clamps shut and you vomit. This has become a legitimate, active fear of water. You're thirsty, but looking at a glass of water begins to make you gag and shy back in fear. The contradiction is hard for your hot brain to see at this point. By now, the doctors will have to put you on IVs to keep you hydrated, but even that's futile. You were dead the second you got a headache. You begin hearing things, or not hearing at all as your thalamus goes. You taste sounds. You see smells. Everything starts feeling like the most horrifying acid trip anyone has ever been on. With your hippocampus long under attack, you're having trouble remembering things, especially family. You're alone, hallucinating, thirsty, confused, and absolutely, undeniably terrified. Everything scares the little shit out of you at this point. These strange people in lab coats, these strange people standing around your bed crying, who keep trying to get you to drink something. And it's only been about a week since that little headache you've completely forgotten about. Time means nothing to you anymore. Funny enough, you now know how that bat felt when he bit you. Eventually, you slip into the, quote, dumb rabies phase. Your brain has started the process of shutting down. Too much of it has been turned into liquid virus. Your face droops. You drool. You're all but unaware of what's going on around you. A sudden noise or light might startle you, but for the most part, Then there's the question of what to do with your corpse. I mean, sure, burying it is the right thing to do. But virus can survive in a corpse for years. You could kill every rabid animal on the planet today. And if 2 years from now, some moist, preserved, rotten hunk of used-to-be brain gets eaten by an animal, it starts all over. So yeah, rabies scares me. And it's everywhere. And that's where this original post ends. Now, if you've made it this far, you probably understand why I wanted to cover this topic. It is absolutely terrifying. So terrifying that it's been reposted across Reddit countless times, along with additional commentary. This next section deals with some of the misinformation that this Redditor feels has been spread as this terrifying story has been reposted. And after reading it, I agree with much of it. But even though this Redditor means well and is trying to correct misinformation, there are still some facts they present that are, in fact, not correct. I'm going to read what they wrote and correct it as needed. The structure of the next part of the post is essentially laid out in bullet points. An argument containing what the Redditor considers misinformation is listed, and then underneath, the Redditor corrects it. But as I said before, some of those corrections are in fact themselves not correct. I don't want this to get confusing, so I'll try to be as clear as possible. They write, each time this gets reposted, referring to the previous post, there is a ton of misinformation that follows by people who simply don't know, or who have heard, quote, information from others who are also ill-informed. People will say, only X number of people have died in the US in the past X years. Rabies is really rare. The Redditor addresses this argument by saying, quote, yes, deaths from rabies are rare in the United States, in the neighborhood of 2 to 3 per year. This does not mean rabies is rare. The reason that mortality is so rare in the US is due to a very aggressive treatment protocol of all bite cases in the United States. If you are bitten and you cannot identify the animal that bit you, or the animal were to die shortly after biting you, you will get post-exposure treatment. That is the protocol. Post-exposure treatment is very effective, almost 100%, if done before you become symptomatic. It involves a series of immunoglobulin shots, many of which are at the site of the bite, as well as a vaccination given over the span of a few months. Fun fact, if you're vaccinated for rabies, you may be able to be an immunoglobulin donor. It's not nearly as bad as was rumored when I was a kid. Something about getting shots in the stomach or something like that. In countries without good treatment protocols, rabies is rampant. India alone sees 20,000 deaths from rabies per year, unquote. The post continues, quote, the why did nobody die of rabies in the past if it's so dangerous argument. The Redditor answers this argument by saying, quote, there were entire epidemics of rabies in the past, so much so that suicide or the murder of those suspected of having rabies were common. In North America, the first case of human death by rabies wasn't reported until 1768. This is because rabies does not appear to be native to North America, and it spread very slowly. So slowly, in fact, that until the mid-1990s, it was assumed that Canada and northern New York didn't have rabies at all. This changed when I was personally one of the first to send in a positive rabies specimen, a raccoon, which helped spawn a cooperative US-Canada rabies bait drop sometime between 1995 and 1999. if memory serves. Unfortunately, it was too late. Rabies had already crossed into Canada. There are still, however, some countries, notably Australia, where everything else is trying to kill you, that still does not have rabies. Unquote. While doing research for this video, I can confirm that the last statement is true. A quick Google search will lead you to the Australian Health Department. They report that there have only been 2 human cases reported between 1900 and 1995. One of them in 1987, the other in 1990. But currently, Australia does not have rabies. So this far in the post, I don't have any problems with what the Redditor has said. Unfortunately, the next section, I cannot say the same about. The Redditor makes a few claims about the Milwaukee Protocol. They address an argument that says lots of people have survived rabies using the Milwaukee Protocol. The Redditor claims this is a false argument. And my research has revealed that that's not entirely true. Rather than reread false information, I'll paraphrase instead. The Redditor acknowledges the Milwaukee Protocol, but they claim it's not been as effective as reported. The fact is, a recent study has shown the Milwaukee Protocol to have saved 11 lives. And the Milwaukee Protocol is currently in its 6th version, and is only used as a last-ditch effort to save a person who has become symptomatic. The precise reason why this treatment has been effective for these 11 individuals is still being debated by doctors. But one thing that's not up for debate is that your best chance of survival is to receive treatment before you've become symptomatic. The next argument the Redditor addresses is the one that states, quote, "Bats don't have rabies all that often. This is just a scare tactic." In response, they write, "False. To date, 6% of bats that have been, quote, captured or come into contact with humans were rabid." The number is a lot higher when you consider that it equates to 1 in 17 bats. If the bat is allowing you to catch or touch it, the odds that there's a problem are simply too high to ignore. The research I've done for this video leads me to conclude that I can't disagree with that. The next argument the Redditor addresses is, quote, "You have to get the treatment within 72 hours, or it won't work anyway." The Redditor addresses this argument by saying, quote, "False. The rabies virus travels via the nervous system and can take several years to reach the brain, depending on the path it takes. If you've been exposed, it's never too late to get the treatment. And just because you didn't die in a week does not mean you're safe." Then the Redditor leaves a link to a story of a man who took 8 years to incubate the virus and become symptomatic. So I definitely agree with this assessment. Your safest bet is to get vaccinated as soon as you're bitten. If you can. There really is no time to waste. I said at the beginning of this video that I saw this topic covered by Lazy Masquerade. I remember when I watched his video, I got chills and literally had dreams about rabies for a few days after. And rereading this post for this video was no less chilling. Check the description box below for a link to Lazy Masquerade's channel, as well as links to some of the sources I used to verify the information for this video. But for now, let's continue with the horrors of disease. I didn't think a video on disease would be complete without including Ebola. Now, fortunately today, this disease is classified as extremely rare. According to recent data, there are less than 1,000 cases a year. And while that information is reassuring, it's still one of the most terrifying viruses that exists. And for me, one of the more terrifying aspects of this virus is that, like rabies, the early symptoms resemble more common illnesses, like a bad cold or flu, such as a high fever, headache, muscle pain, and chills. But later on, a person may experience internal bleeding, resulting in vomiting and coughing blood. People experience pain in the abdomen, chest, joints, or other muscles. They experience dehydration, fatigue, loss of appetite, malaise, and heavy sweating. There are headaches, mental confusion, red spots on the skin, red eyes, and a sore throat. But even with treatment, around 50% of people infected with Ebola wind up dead. And like rabies, scientists think people are initially infected with the Ebola virus through contact with an infected animal, something that scientists refer to as a spillover event. After initial infection, the virus is spread person to person through physical contact. The virus spreads through direct contact with broken skin or mucous membranes located in the eyes, nose, or mouth. It can be spread through bodily fluids such as urine, saliva, sweat, feces, vomit, breast milk, anatomic fluid, and even semen. The virus can even be transmitted on objects such as clothes, bedding, needles, and medical equipment if it's come into contact with any of the aforementioned fluids. Another scary similarity to rabies is that people infected with Ebola don't develop symptoms right away, and it can only be transmitted once someone has become symptomatic. But once they do, quarantining becomes essential. But the scariest aspect of Ebola, despite its rarity, is its ability to hide. Scientists have discovered the virus can lay dormant in the brains of individuals that have previously been treated and have recovered, and occasionally, and horrifyingly, recurrent infections have emerged. The most recent Ebola outbreak began in West Africa in 2014 and raged until 2016. During that time, a total of 28,616 cases were documented. 11,310 deaths were reported in Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone, with an additional 36 cases and 15 deaths occurring in other places such as the US, Germany, and Spain. Globally, the scourge of Ebola, since 1976 to 2020, has claimed approximately 15,200 lives, with a total of 34,600 reported cases. Hopefully, the scientific research being done now will help prevent any future outbreaks. Of course, only time will tell. I hope you've enjoyed this journey through some of the horrors that Mother Nature threatens us with. Please don't forget to like, comment, share this video, and most importantly, subscribe for more. Because on this channel, it isn't simply